The first American shots fired in World War I were not on the battlefields of France. It could be said that they were fired on the Arizona-Mexico border. The Mexican Revolution, which had been going on for more than a decade, created an opportunity for Germany to expand its influence and keep the United States distracted and out of the war in Europe. To this end, they supplied the Mexican government with advisors, weapons, and intelligence. General Pancho Villa, commander of the División del Norte, a well-armed force numbering in the thousands, was a beneficiary of this German military aid. Villa, one of the founding fathers and a driving force behind the Mexican Revolution, became a renegade in December of 1915 after a falling out with the leaders of the Carranza government. He and his army were driven north, where the División del Norte was defeated by General Álvaro Obregón at the Second Battle of Nogales. Pursued by General Obregón's forces along the Arizona-New Mexico border, Villa's anger grew with every mile. Villa's forces, desperate for supplies and intent on revenge, brutally attacked the small border town of Columbus, New Mexico on March 14, 1916. The battle raged for over 2 hours, ending only after an overwhelming counterattack by U.S. troops using machine guns. 8 troopers and 10 civilians were killed before Villa retreated back across the border. The death of the soldiers and civilians in New Mexico generated a strong response from the U.S. government. President Woodrow Wilson had had enough. He personally ordered General Pershing to capture or kill Pancho Villa. The 1st Arizona Infantry, under the command of Colonel Alexander M. Tuthill, immediately answered President Wilson's call, joining General Pershing in the effort to capture Pancho Villa. Colonel Tuthill and the 1st Arizona arrived at Camp Douglas in May of 1916, immediately taking up positions along the Arizona-Mexico border, preventing any further encroachment by Villa. Despite the massive effort by Pershing's force of 140,000 soldiers, Pancho Villa was never captured. Chasing Pancho Villa, however, served as the backdrop for the expansion and modernization of the Army and helped train the first American combat troops used in World War I. The U.S. Army attained a number of firsts while chasing Villa. The first truck convoy ever to be used in military activities. The first time American military planes were used to scout and transfer messages in a combat environment. And the first use of machine guns against an attacking force. Not only did the troops become more cohesive and proficient, many officers gained valuable command experience, knowledge that the American Expeditionary Force would soon use in the Great War. The 1st Arizona Infantry played an important role in the hunt for Pancho Villa, serving on the border for 15 months. During this time, Germany declared unrestricted submarine warfare, and the contents of the infamous Zimmermann telegram were publicly revealed. Germany, in the telegram, had secretly proposed a military alliance with Mexico, offering the return of Texas, Arizona, and California back to Mexican control upon a German victory. The United States could take no more, declaring all-out war on Germany, April 6, 1917. The 1st Arizona Infantry, in August of 1917, was activated into the U.S. Army, becoming the newly designated 158th Infantry Regiment. Colonel Tuthill, originally the commander of the 158th, was quickly reassigned and promoted to the rank of Brigadier General, becoming one of the youngest brigade commanders in World War I. The newly formed 79th Infantry 40th Division, with General Tuthill on the command staff, spent the next year training at Camp Kearny in California. The 158th Infantry Regiment was finally deployed to France in August 1918, where its ranks were used to replace fallen and wounded soldiers across the front. One of the most outstanding members of the original 1st Arizona Infantry was Flagstaff resident Edward M. Robeson. Lieutenant Robeson served on the Mexican border with the 1st Arizona and trained with them at Camp Kearny before deploying to France. Upon his arrival, he was promoted to captain and assigned to the 372nd Infantry Regiment, 93rd Division. The 372nd, under the command of the French Army, moved against the Germans at Montois in October 1918. Captain Robeson was severely wounded in the attack, but stayed with his battalion for 2 days while under a constant heavy barrage of artillery and machine gun fire. He continued to lead and inspire his men until he succumbed to his wounds. Captain Robeson recovered and was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the Croix de Guerre, and the Purple Heart for his extraordinary heroism on the battlefield. Less than 1 month later, the war was over. When President Wilson arrived in France for the Paris Peace Conference, members of the 158th served as his honor guard. In addition, the 158th Military Band was chosen to entertain the peace delegates on numerous occasions throughout the conference. General Tuthill and the 1st Arizona Infantry, now designated as the 158th Infantry Regiment, served with honor and distinction in World War I. On May 18, 1917, the Selective Service Act was passed, requiring all men between 18 and 45 to register for the draft. Arizonans were quick to answer the call to arms. In a rush to serve, over 40,000 Arizonans registered for the draft from a population of less than 260,000. Of the 25,234 who were declared eligible, over 11,000 would eventually serve in the Great War. Arizona was the only state in the Union to overfill its draft quota for all 3 registration cycles. On the 3rd call-up in June of 1918, Arizona surpassed its obligation by 582 men. Under the operation of local draft boards, men were given physical exams to weed out those who weren't fit for duty. Medical examiners inspected more than 9 million men across the country in the largest such operation in United States history. On the state level, Arizona gave more physical exams per capita to registered men than any other state and had one of the lowest failure rates in the country. Only 272 men failed their draft physicals. Nationwide, flat feet affected an estimated 1 in 5 American men. In another first for Arizona, only 20 men were rejected for flat feet, the fewest in the country. The reason for this was thought to be that Arizonans typically wore a high heel style footwear, commonly known as the cowboy boot. At the end of the war, 11,410 Arizonans had served the nation. 9,957 were drafted or volunteered for service in the U.S. Army. 1,269 had enlisted in the United States Navy, and 147 had joined the Marine Corps. Arizona women were represented in this group, with 34 having enlisted as nurses in the U.S. Army and 3 becoming yeomanettes in the United States Navy. Arizona patriots responded to the call of duty with fervor, serving the nation with honor and distinction. On the home front, Arizonans of all ages and all walks of life did their part and more to support the United States effort in World War I. They actively participated in charitable organizations and worked long hours on ranches, farms, and mines, all while helping soldiers and their families. The Arizona Red Cross, even before the declaration of war, had been serving thousands of soldiers who either passed through or were serving on the border during the hunt for Pancho Villa. Once war was declared, local Red Cross volunteers began actively manning food stands known as hunger huts, where they served food and beverages to soldiers. They also made surgical dressings, clothing, and knitted garments for Army units stationed in Arizona and troops overseas. The Red Cross raised money to help fund home service activities by arranging socials, dances, barbecues, and other activities. Most of this aid went to families of Arizona servicemen sent to fight the war, but some went to refugees overseas. By war's end, the Arizona Red Cross had collected and sent over 4 tons of clothing to help the war-ravaged civilians of Europe. Throughout World War I, the YMCA provided morale and welfare services for the military. By war's end, they had operated 1,500 canteens in the United States and France, set up 4,000 YMCA huts for recreation and religious services, and raised more than $235 million for relief work. The Arizona YMCA actively supported national YMCA efforts. They provided nurses, chaplains, food, and morale-boosting activities to the people of Arizona while sending YMCA members to Europe to aid soldiers and civilians. The Salvation Army of Arizona, like the Red Cross, directly aided the families of soldiers, supplying them with food, aid, and comfort. They were well known for their pastries, making sure the servicemen passing through the state had a hot cup of coffee and a donut. Arizona troops of the Boy Scouts of America provided community services and assistance to the Red Cross and Salvation Army. They were especially helpful supporting the Red Cross in local Liberty Bond rallies and events. The Arizona Boy Scouts also answered the President's nationwide call for a black walnut tree survey. The black walnut, a native Arizona tree, was very important to the war effort, as it was used almost exclusively in the production of airplane propellers. Arizonans bought over $45 million in war bonds and contributed over $500,000 to the Arizona Red Cross. In every fundraising drive, including Liberty Bonds, thrift stamps, and Red Cross campaigns, Arizona donors filled or overfilled their quotas. The women of Arizona were instrumental in reaching these goals, being responsible for selling more than half of all war bonds sold in Arizona. The Arizona State Legislature did their part by passing state laws benefiting the Arizona men who served their country. The legislation stipulated that Arizona National Guard members would be credited for their time in the federal Army. Arizona servicemen and their families would be protected from delinquent rents, taxes, and court actions, and guaranteed that all who served in the military would have the right to vote in all state and local elections. The farmers, ranchers, and miners of Arizona did their part, supplying many of the materials, supplies, and food items needed to run the American war machine. The cotton fields of Arizona produced thousands of bales of cotton that were used for clothing, military items, and airplanes. Long staple cotton, known as Pima cotton, was used in the production of aircraft tires and aviation fabric that was used to cover the bodies and wings of combat planes. Thousands of horses and mules were bred for the war effort, and hundreds of thousands of beef cattle were raised to feed the troops on the front. In 1917, Arizona was the largest producer of copper in the nation. This strategic metal was one of Arizona's greatest contributions in the fight against Germany. It was used in shell casings, engine parts, communications gear, and hundreds of other military applications. The caring and unselfish citizens of Arizona will long be remembered for their hard work and sacrifices made on the home front. Arizonans did their part to help win the war to end all wars. Construction of the USS Arizona began in early 1913. Designated with hull number BB-39, the USS Arizona was the second and last of the U.S. Navy's Super Dreadnought battleships. Launched on June 19, 1915 from the Brooklyn Navy Yard, 75,000 people, the mayor of New York, and the governor of Arizona witnessed the big event. Esther Ross of Prescott, Arizona, christened the ship with sparkling wine from Ohio and a bottle filled with some of the first water to pass over Arizona's newly completed Roosevelt Dam. The ship was named to celebrate Arizona's entry into the Union as the 48th state. As a way of connecting to the ship and publicly saying thank you to the Navy for honoring Arizona, a statewide effort was undertaken to fund the creation of a unique gift for the new battleship. Acknowledging the state's long mining history, the citizens of Arizona presented a handcrafted copper and silver service set to be used in the captain's formal dining room. The USS Arizona was considered to be the largest, most powerful, and technically advanced battleship in the world. The ship was armed with 12 14-inch guns, cutting-edge turbine machinery, and could reach a top speed of 21 knots in the open sea. The ship was propelled by massive oil-powered steam turbines. As with all new technology, it took months to work out all the technical issues. By March 1918, sea trials were completed, the crew well-trained, and the battleship was ready for war. The USS Arizona, however, was unable to join the U.S. battle fleet. She remained stateside and was used as a gunnery training vessel. In November 1918, she departed New York with orders to join the U.S. Navy Battle Division 6. The USS Arizona arrived in England just 1 week before the end of hostilities and never saw action. In early December, President Woodrow Wilson boarded the SS George Washington for a cross-Atlantic journey to the Paris peace talks. On December 12, 1918, the USS Arizona and the U.S. Navy Battle Division 6 joined Wilson en route, escorting him on the final leg of his journey to France. Later that month, the USS Arizona returned to New York carrying 238 battle-weary veterans. For the next 22 years, the USS Arizona served the Navy well as a naval gunner training platform, while traveling the world as a goodwill ambassador. On December 7, 1941, a day that will live in infamy, the USS Arizona was destroyed by Japanese warplanes while docked at the U.S. Naval Base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Honoring the 1,177 U.S. servicemen who died on that fateful day, the USS Arizona Memorial in Pearl Harbor is one of the nation's most revered and hallowed sites. Lieutenant Frank Luke, over the span of 17 days in September 1918, shot down 18 German aircraft. 14 balloons and 4 planes were destroyed in only 30 hours of aerial combat. This incredible feat propelled him to the coveted status of ace, second only to Ace of Aces Captain Eddie Rickenbacker. Rickenbacker said Lieutenant Frank Luke was the most daring aviator and greatest fighter pilot of the entire war. Lieutenant Luke was born on May 19, 1897 in Phoenix, Arizona. He exemplified the qualities of a combat pilot: razor-sharp instincts, natural hunting skills, and exceptional courage. Shortly after war was declared, he enlisted, taking these skills to the Army Aviation School in the late fall of 1917. In April 1918, Luke was assigned to the 27th Aero Squadron, known as the Screaming Eagles, based outside of Paris. Luke vowed to take on the toughest targets on the battlefield, the well-protected German observation balloons. On September 12th, he did just that. After 3 dangerous passes, he downed his first balloon. 6 days later, Luke shot down 5 more enemy aircraft. General Billy Mitchell personally congratulated Luke for his balloon-busting victories. Luke told him, "If you return tomorrow evening, you'll see 2 more balloons burn up." General Mitchell was not disappointed. Frank Luke continued his run, and on September 18th he shot down 2 balloons and 3 planes in less than 10 minutes, an incredible feat never again equaled in the annals of aerial combat. 11 days later, on September 29th, Luke took off alone and unauthorized. He dropped a note from his plane which read, "Watch 3 Hun balloons on the Meuse." Those on the ground observed an amazing and unbelievable sight, as all 3 balloons were shot out of the sky. After Luke finished off the last balloon, he was ambushed by 5 German fighters. He was wounded during the battle and driven from the sky. Before he crash-landed, he strafed a German column, killing 6 and wounding 12. Armed with only a pistol, Luke refused to surrender to German troops. In a running shootout, Lieutenant Frank Luke was killed. He was just 22 years old. Ace fighter pilot and hero, Lieutenant Frank Luke, whose courageous actions will never be forgotten, was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Cross and the Congressional Medal of Honor. John Henry Pruitt grew up in Phoenix, and in 1917, at the age of 20, he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. After completing training at Parris Island, he was promoted to corporal, designated a Marine Scout sniper, and shipped to the trenches of France. In June 1918, the Marines of the 6th Regiment battled the Germans in fierce fighting at Belleau Wood. This would be Marine Corporal John Henry Pruitt's baptism of fire and his first taste of war. Always moving forward, the Marines advanced on the entrenched German machine gun positions in successive attacks. Often fighting hand-to-hand and with bayonets, they fought day and night without relief, sleep, or a hot meal. 2 weeks later, Corporal Pruitt and the 6th Marine Regiment would be tested again at the Battle of Chateau Thierry. The Marines, under non-stop artillery and mortar fire, came under a heavy gas attack. They donned gas masks and went over the top. The rubber gas masks caused the Marines to sweat profusely, foam at the mouth, and turn the whites of their eyes bloody red. The legend goes that when the Marines topped the trenches, they killed everything in their path. German troops, seeing the blood-red eyes of the Marines coming out of a thick cloud of gas, began to panic. They started yelling that dogs from hell were attacking them. During the battle, Pruitt's gas mask was pulled off in the vicious hand-to-hand fighting. Overcome by gas, he was evacuated to the rear for treatment. The Marines, after a month-long bloody battle, would emerge victorious against the finest German troops the Kaiser could muster. Pruitt recovered and returned to the Devil Dogs in mid-September for what would be his last battle. At the Battle of Blanc-Mont Ridge, Pruitt would single-handedly take out 2 German machine guns, killing 2 soldiers and capturing 40. His courageous actions that day saved countless lives. Before the next attack, Pruitt's commanding officer pulled him from the trenches, assigning him to sniper detail. It was to be a fateful decision. During the ensuing battle, Corporal Pruitt was seriously injured by enemy mortar fire. He died of his wounds on October 4th, 1918. It was his 22nd birthday. For his brave and heroic actions, Marine Corporal John Henry Pruitt was posthumously awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor from both the Army and the Navy, sacrificing his life for his country and his fellow Marines. When World War I broke out, John C. Greenway was already an Arizona hero, having served with Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders during the 1898 Spanish-American War. 19 years later, when war was declared on Germany in April 1918, John Greenway immediately volunteered. Major Greenway was assigned to the Railroad Corps, becoming one of the first Arizonans sent to France. He pressed hard to be reassigned to a combat unit. His efforts finally paid off when he transferred to the 101st Infantry Regiment Command Staff, stationed on the front lines. Major Greenway's battle-tested leadership skills served him well at Cantigny, Chateau Thierry, Saint-Mihiel, and during the Meuse-Argonne offensive. During this period, the 101st, as part of the Yankee Division, fought virtually non-stop for 9 months. Major Greenway, for his bravery, coolness, and competence in these campaigns, was promoted to lieutenant colonel. It was at the Battle of Cambrai, near Verdun, that Colonel Greenway's leadership and battle tactics would be put to the ultimate test. After an overwhelming German artillery bombardment, in which both battalion commanders were seriously wounded, the battalion was in total disarray. Colonel Greenway took command under fire and called for his troops to reform and hold the line. He assembled all available members of the devastated battalion and led them out of the trenches, across the open battlefield, and into a hail of bullets. They viciously attacked the heavily fortified German trenches in force, descending into bloody hand-to-hand combat. The Germans were pushed back as Colonel Greenway's battalion captured the high ground. The Americans had attained a much-needed victory. Colonel John C. Greenway was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for leadership, heroism, and gallantry on the battlefield at Cambrai. In thanks for this turning point victory, the French awarded him the Legion of Merit and the Croix de Guerre with palm en bronze. General John C. Greenway, one of the founding fathers of the American Legion, a dedicated leader and war hero. Arizona Native Americans from all walks of life made heroic contributions to the war effort. Company F of the Arizona National Guard included soldiers from many Native American communities. Company F reportedly held the distinction of being the only all-Native American unit in the country at the time. Company L of the Guard included 15 Native Americans from Yuma. The soldiers of Companies F and L served on the Arizona-New Mexico border, along with other members of the 1st Arizona Infantry. They would soon be incorporated into the 158th Infantry Regiment and shipped to France. Private Sam Saskatchewan, along with 8 other members of the small Wallapai Nation, voluntarily enlisted for service in World War I. He was assigned to Camp Kearney for training, where he joined his fellow Arizonans in the 158th Infantry Regiment. Private Saskatchewan was shipped to France in August of 1918. On October 2nd, after repeatedly exposing himself to enemy fire while scouting German positions, Private Sam Saskatchewan made the ultimate sacrifice, giving his life at the Battle of the Marne. Private Saskatchewan was posthumously awarded the Fourragère Oculaire de la Croix de Guerre. Private Sam Saskatchewan's remains were eventually returned to Kingman, where he was buried with full military and tribal honors. Matthew B. Juan, a member of the Gila River Indian community, enlisted in December of 1917. After completing training in Texas, he received orders to depart for Europe. Private Juan, along with the rest of his unit, boarded the converted luxury liner SS Tuscania on February 15, 1918. German U-boat UB-77 stalked, attacked, and sunk the Tuscania. 265 soldiers and crew perished. Private Juan was one of the lucky ones to be rescued. After recovering from the horrendous U-boat attack, he was assigned to the 28th Infantry Company K of the 1st Division. Private Juan and Company K were chosen to have the honor of being the first troops out of the trenches and onto the battlefield. After 2 hours of intense fighting, the Americans overran and captured the German-held positions. Private Juan, while defending the captured trenches from a German machine gun counterattack, was shot in the chest and died from his wounds. Private Matthew B. Juan holds the distinction of being the first Arizonan and first Native American to die in combat in World War I. World War I changed the future of women across America. Thousands of Arizona women would be part of that change. These dedicated women served in many civilian-based organizations, such as the Red Cross, the YMCA, the Salvation Army, and other service organizations both stateside and in Europe. They assisted by arranging social gatherings and a wide variety of sporting events, activities to help the soldiers forget the horrors of war. They even set up libraries as places for soldiers to relax and learn to read. Hannah C. Eggleston, a hometown girl from Phoenix, answered the call to volunteer service, joining the YMCA. She served over 12 months in the hospitals of France, tending to the medical needs of the sick and wounded. Arizona women also served as part of the large civilian support system aiding the armed forces. One of these enthusiastic women, Mildred T. Parsons of Tucson, was employed in France by the Army Quartermaster Corps. She worked as a file clerk, managing and coordinating the records for arriving and departing members of the American Expeditionary Force throughout Europe. Less than a month after the United States Naval Reserve Act of 1916 was enacted, the first female yeomen, affectionately known as yeomanettes, were sworn in. The Navy, concerned for the yeomanettes' safety in combat situations, vigorously trained them in the use of firearms, both pistols and rifles. By war's end, the Navy had enlisted 11,275 yeomanettes, and the Marines had added over 300 nurses to its ranks. Over 30 courageous women from Arizona enlisted in the United States Navy. Anna Margaret Sutton from Scottsdale was one of these brave women. Yeoman Sutton served stateside at the Navy Shipyard in Washington, D.C. and the Naval Torpedo Station in Virginia. The U.S. Army soon followed the Navy, actively recruiting women to join their ranks. By 1918, 21,480 mostly young women joined the U.S. Army Nurse Corps. More than 10,000 endured the long and treacherous Atlantic crossing to the battlefields of Europe. They manned hospitals, field first aid stations, and recovery facilities, many only a short distance from the battlefield. They endured horrendous conditions as they brought much-needed medical care and personal attention to the devastated and injured soldiers. Catherine Lazenby from Glendale served in the Army Nurse Corps and was posted to Letterman General Hospital in the Presidio of San Francisco. Nurse Lazenby spent most of her time quarantined in overcrowded and unsanitary conditions while tending to the sick and dying during the great influenza epidemic of 1918. Ola May Davis of Tucson, Catherine O'Sullivan of Douglas, and Margaret Lawless are but a few of the brave, selfless nurses from Arizona who served in hospitals and first aid stations along the front lines. These brave, heroic, and skillful nurses tended to the overwhelming needs of the wounded, sick, and dying. The most noted and well-known of the Arizona nurses who served overseas was Ina E. Giddings. She enlisted in the U.S. Army Nurses Corps in 1918. Ina Giddings volunteered to go to France, where she served for almost 2 years as a physiotherapist. At times, Nurse Giddings was the only woman on the ward, helping many wounded young men recover from their devastating injuries. The Arizona Women of World War I were part of a noble and heroic group of dedicated women who served their country and Arizona with honor and fortitude. Two heroic pilots from Arizona, Lieutenant Ralph O'Neill and Lieutenant Ernest A. Love, both were members of the 147th Aero Pursuit Squadron. One returned an ace. One returned to be buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Second Lieutenant Ralph O'Neill was born in Mexico, raised in Nogales, Arizona, and joined the United States Army Signal Corps in the summer of 1917. Having completed his basic flight training in Texas, he was assigned to the 147th Aero Squadron. Along with the other members of the unit, Lieutenant O'Neill was shipped to France in the spring of 1918, where he immediately began advanced fighter pilot training at the Isidun Aerodrome. Lieutenant O'Neill excelled, becoming an exceptional combat pilot. Between July 2nd and July 28, 1918, over the battlefields of Château-Thierry, Saint-Mihiel, and the Argonne sectors, O'Neill attacked the Germans with unrelenting ferocity. Lieutenant O'Neill, in 3 separate air battles, had 6 confirmed kills while fighting off dozens more enemy aircraft, all while protecting observation balloons and ground troops from attacks from the sky. Lieutenant O'Neill was one of only 3 men to receive 3 separate Distinguished Service Crosses in World War I. all three for extraordinary heroism in action and courage under fire. The French government also awarded O'Neill the Croix de Guerre with Palm for heroism and gallantry. Lieutenant O'Neill became the first recognized ace and most decorated pilot from the 147th Aero Squadron. Lieutenant Ernest A. Love, a hometown hero from Prescott, Arizona, enlisted in the United States Army in the fall of 1917. After completing officer candidate school, he qualified for pilot training. Lieutenant Love was the only one of his flight training class of 15 to earn his wings. Lieutenant Love departed for France in mid-January 1918 and continued his advanced fighter training at the Issoudun Aerodrome. The training center had been constructed for the specific purpose of further developing the most skilled pilots, exposing the Americans to the most advanced combat flying techniques. Love was drilled in acrobatics, formation flying, and mock dogfights using cameras in place of machine guns, all taught by combat-hardened flight instructors. Lieutenant Love was one of a small handful of pilots to be selected for even more intense training at a newly constructed aerial combat training center in Italy. In July 1918, he joined the 147th Aero Squadron. He flew missions almost daily, mostly protecting observation balloons and acting as an aerial spotter for Allied artillery batteries. Love experienced his first dogfight in August 1918. Attacked by 5 enemy fighters, he was able to fly his way out of danger and escape with his life. On September 14th, he was ordered to help defend the ground troops involved in the massive San Miguel offensive. Lieutenant Love never made the rendezvous with his pursuit squadron. He was attacked and overwhelmed by German planes, shot out of the sky, and crashed. He was initially buried in France, but his remains were later moved to his final burial site at the Arlington National Cemetery. Arizonans of Mexican heritage have long been an important part of Arizona's military history. They made up a sizable portion of the 1st Arizona Infantry during the run-up to World War I. Units like Company E of the 1st Arizona were composed entirely of Mexican-American guardsmen, mostly from Tucson. They served on the border with the rest of the 1st after Pancho Villa's vicious attack on Columbus, New Mexico. In the spring of 1917, troops of the 1st Arizona were transferred to Camp Kearny in Southern California. They were subsequently redesignated the 158th Infantry Brigade. One of the veterans of the newly formed 158th Infantry was Corporal Alexandro B. Moisa of Jerome, Arizona. After completing his training, he shipped out to France, where he was attached to the 2nd Division, 4th Machine Gun Battalion. Private Moisa served on the Chateau Thierry front, where he was wounded in action in September 1918. Upon returning to his unit in early October 1918, he participated in an attack on German-held positions on Mont Blanc Ridge. As Allied troops pushed forward, Corporal Moisa's machine gun battalion continued to transport guns and ammunition as close to enemy lines as possible. On October 6, 1918, at the height of the intense battle, Corporal Moisa was killed. For the courage he showed that day, Corporal Alexandro B. Moisa was posthumously awarded the Citation Star, the Purple Heart, and the French Croix de Guerre. Vicente Manzo of Benson. After completing training at Camp Funston, he was assigned to Company E of the 355th Infantry. On September 15, 1918, on the battlefield of San Miguel, Private Manzo was seriously wounded and was transported to a French field hospital. 56 days later, on November 10, 1918, Private Vicente Manzo died of complications resulting from his wounds. Private Justo B. Cordova of Williams, Arizona, during the Alsace-Lorraine offensive, had been tasked, along with other members of Company D, 110th Infantry, to hold an important wooded section of the battlefield. After repeated attempts to dislodge them, the Germans launched a devastating nighttime artillery and aerial bombardment. Private Cordova, along with over 30 other members of his unit, were killed in the horrific German counterattack. His body was never recovered. Private Justo B. Cordova's grave is empty, but serves as a memorial to one of the boys from Arizona that went off to war and never returned. Two Arizonans, Reducindo A. Lopez from Casa Grande and Jose C. Salazar from Tucson, after being drafted, trained, and sent to France, were both assigned to the 128th Infantry, Private Lopez to Company C and Private Salazar to Company A. The 128th was one of 4 infantry regiments that made up a large part of the infamous 32nd Division, known as the Red Arrow. On October 18, 1918, during the Argonne Meuse offensive, Reducindo A. Lopez was killed in action. He was the first soldier from Casa Grande to die in combat. On the foggy morning of November 10, 1918, the 128th Infantry, with Private Jose Salazar in its ranks, led the attack on retreating German forces east of the Meuse River near Bois-Pomepre. In a flanking move, the Germans caught the Americans in a withering crossfire of artillery and machine gun fire. Hundreds of men, including Private Salazar, lost their lives just one day before the armistice officially ended the conflict known as World War I. Private Reducindo A. Lopez and Private Jose C. Salazar were posthumously decorated with the Fourragère aux Couleurs de la Croix de Guerre with palm leaf. Arizonans of Mexican heritage served, suffered, and died for their country while bringing honor and glory to Arizona. Arizona had a number of well-known and admired World War I-era politicians. When the United States entered World War I in 1917, Carl Trumbull Hayden was a strong supporter of President Wilson and voted to support the declaration of war. Hayden defied an executive order forbidding members of Congress from volunteering for military service. Commissioned as a major in the United States Army, he was given command of a battalion. The battalion was assigned to Camp Lewis in Washington for intense military training. Major Hayden personally oversaw the training of his troops, preparing them to be shipped to the battlefields of France. Before training was complete, however, the armistice was signed, and Major Hayden returned to his seat in Congress. Lewis W. Douglas from Jerome, Arizona, volunteered for service in World War I in early 1917. He was promoted to the rank of first lieutenant in the spring of 1918 and deployed to France. Lieutenant Douglas saw action on the battlefields of Saint-Mihiel and the Meuse-Argonne offensive, where his heroic actions earned him recognition by the Belgian government, awarding him the Belgium Croix de Guerre for heroism. He also received a personal combat citation from General Pershing. Robert L. Finch of Tempe, Arizona. Upon completing officer training, he was shipped to France, promoted to first lieutenant, and assigned as adjutant to the 372nd Infantry Regiment, the 93rd Division. The battle-hardened black troops of the 93rd Division, along with the famed Harlem Hell Fighters of the 92nd Division, were some of the first American soldiers to arrive on French soil. On September 28, 1918, near Bussy-Ferme, Lieutenant Finch, in the face of intense artillery and machine gun fire, successfully led his troops in an attack on fortified German positions. Later that day, he and a fellow officer advanced under heavy fire to the enemy's barbed wire defenses, cutting an opening and allowing Allied forces to overtake the German-held trenches. For his heroic actions on that day, Lieutenant Finch was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross and a Silver Star. In recognition of his service to the people of France, the French government awarded Lieutenant Finch the Croix de Guerre. Major Carl Trumbull Hayden, Lieutenant Lewis W. Douglas, and Lieutenant Robert L. Finch were dedicated public servants and true Arizona heroes. Two of Arizona's most beloved and best-known World War I chaplains were Father Albert Braun and the Reverend John Doc Clifford. At the start of World War I, the United States Army recognized the need for many more skilled chaplains. The chaplains would be trained as military officers, graduating with the rank of first lieutenant. Their duty to offer religious services, counseling, moral support, and identification and burial of the dead. Father Al, as he was known, was ordained a Catholic priest in 1915. The intensely patriotic priest enlisted in the Army in June 1918 and was assigned to the 6th Infantry Division after completing chaplain training. He soon saw firsthand the devastating horrors of war during the massive Meuse-Argonne offensive. Unauthorized and unarmed, he went over the top with the first wave of assault troops at Saint-Mihiel. As the battle raged around him, he attended to the needs of the wounded and dying with little regard for his own safety. He remained on the field, giving comfort to the wounded and last rites to the dying. At the end of one of the bloodiest battles in World War I, Father Al took on the grim duty of collecting dog tags and burying the dead. He was personally responsible for burying hundreds of doughboys in the distant graveyards of France. Father Albert Braun's dedicated service was recognized and acknowledged with the Arizona Medal of Honor. The Reverend John H. Clifford, an ordained minister, was appointed pastor of the First Baptist Church of Tucson in early 1914. At the outbreak of the war, Doc Clifford volunteered to become a YMCA chaplain. He was sent to Camp Travis for training and then on to France, where he was assigned to the 5th Marine Regiment. The Marines grew so fond of Doc Clifford and his unpretentious nature that they replaced his YMCA insignias with Marine Corps emblems on its jacket and hat. Doc Clifford was the only civilian to ever be honored in this way. He was at their side time after time as the Marines went over the top into combat. Doc Clifford not attended tended to the spiritual needs of his comrades, he also rescued countless wounded, often under intense fire and dangerous conditions. It was at the Battle of the Bois de Belle in the Château-Thierry region that Doc Clifford showed extraordinary heroism by rescuing his seriously wounded commanding officer from an abandoned trench. The Reverend John Doc Clifford was awarded the Croix de Guerre and the Lorraine Cross of Valor for his courageous and selfless performance that day on the battlefield of France. Chaplain Albert Braun and the Reverend John Doc Clifford left a lasting and enduring mark with their contributions and service to the people of Arizona. These are the stories of the Arizona men who served with conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty. 8 Arizonans who fought across the trench-lined battlefields of Europe from July 15 through September 13, 1918, were decorated with the Distinguished Service Cross. Private Frank C. Morey of Winslow was the only one of these courageous men to be killed in combat during that time period. Private Morey was called upon to deliver an important military dispatch to the front line. While attempting to get through the heavy shell and machine gun fire, this gallant soldier was killed in action near Forêt-de-Vanchères, France, on September 13, 1918. One of the most decorated of these distinguished Arizonans was Captain George T. Fleet. Fleet was first wounded in action October 17, 1917. Over the next 9 months, he was wounded in combat 7 times, gassed twice, and received several battlefield commissions, rising to the rank of captain. Captain Fleet, on July 21, 1918, showing absolute disregard for his own life, crossed a battlefield with vital information on enemy strength and positions, saving thousands of American and French lives. 3 Arizonans, Lieutenant Joseph F. Swift, Lieutenant James S. Higley, and Captain Edward J. Mitchell, served with the 91st Division during the savage fighting of the Meuse-Argonne offensive. All three distinguished themselves on the same battlefield across a 2-day period. Lieutenant Joseph F. Swift of Safford, on September 27, 1918, armed only with a pistol, advanced on a German machine gun nest, killing 4 German soldiers. On September 29th, while making an attempt to capture another German machine gun emplacement, he was killed by enemy sniper fire. Lieutenant James S. Higley from Phoenix, over a 2-day period beginning September 26th, fearlessly led his platoon through sustained enemy fire, capturing multiple enemy positions along the way. While leading his platoon against entrenched German positions, Lieutenant Higley was killed in combat on September 27, 1918. Captain Edward J. Mitchell of Prescott, while leading his troops across the battlefield, encountered and captured 3 German field guns, 6 officers, and over 425 German soldiers. Captain Edward J. Mitchell, for displaying the highest bravery, courage, and extraordinary leadership on the battlefield, was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. October 1918 was a deadly month for Arizonans. Private Louis Comina from Chrysotile, Arizona, Private Hugh K. Gale of Franklin, and U.S. Navy apprentice First Class Eugene H. Tinley of Wilcox all died on October 4, 1918, while displaying the highest levels of bravery and conspicuous gallantry. The last Arizonan to die in the blood-stained month of October was Lieutenant Morgan B. McDermott of Tucson. On a reconnaissance mission, he found himself behind enemy lines with a wounded comrade, and while rendering aid, was wounded himself. Taken from the battlefield to a French field hospital, he died 9 days later, on October 29, 1918. 7 days before the armistice, 3 Arizonans, all fighting on the same battlefield, all members of the 89th Division, were recognized for their courage and heroism under fire. Corporal George C. Hollis of Ajo, Private Richard E. King of Tucson, and Sergeant Elgin J. Moore of Winslow. All were awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. Colonel Charles A. Dravo of Fort McDowell, Arizona, led a frontline battalion in an attack on a heavily reinforced German position. The battle lasted for more than 29 hours. Colonel Dravo labored without rest or relief, finally overwhelming the enemy after vicious hand-to-hand combat. He was the last Arizonan to be honored and awarded the Distinguished Service Cross in World War I. 27 Arizonans, for their selflessness, leadership, and courageous acts of heroism on the battlefields of France, were recognized and honored with the Distinguished Service Cross. The violent upheaval known as World War I was finally over. At 11 a.m. on November 11, 1918, victory celebrations simultaneously broke out across the battlefields of Europe and in capital cities around the world. Arizona's doughboys were coming home. 11,410 Arizonans had sacrificed and served on the battlefields of Europe. Tragically, 127 names were added to Arizona's roll of the honored dead. Arizona's hometown heroes were recognized with 3 Congressional Medals of Honor for actions above and beyond the call of duty. Over 27 Distinguished Service Crosses were awarded for courage under fire. Tens of thousands served on the home front with long hours of hard work and countless acts of personal sacrifice. These brave Arizonans, soldiers and civilians alike, gave all that they had in the fight for freedom and liberty.